Hello, welcome to HOTPOT. I'm your host, Joni Poon, stirring the pot on Asian BIPOC mental health and wellness.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. I am so honored, Mehran, for you to be here, and I am really excited to hear your stories and words of wisdom. You are living such a beautiful and authentic life in the story, and the changes that you've experienced is amazing, and I look forward to having our guests listen and share in this journey of yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. I'm wondering if we can try something before
Sure.
we start. I thought as part of this identity, going back into our roots, is kind of begins with our name, right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you know where your origins of your name came about, and if your name even has a meaning to it.
Sure. Good question. So Mehran, as it's pronounced in Persian, although people here, because the pronunciation is a bit hard, they just say Mehran. But Mehran, the first part of my name, Mehr, is the month in which I was born, and it also means compassion in Farsi. And I'm not sure, to be honest, why my parents chose that name. Maybe because of my birth month, and maybe for other reasons. But as far as the origin, I honestly don't know. I don't know how far back it goes, but it's a very Iranian name.
I love how it almost has that soft purr to it. It's very beautiful. I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and it's funny because many people have called me by different names, you know, because they don't know necessarily how to pronounce it, like Mehran, 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 you know, in all these different ways I hear it. And so when I was younger in high school and shy and introverted and not even wanting to correct anyone because don't even bother or create the slightest confrontation or you know, conflict, for example, you know, by even correcting them. So that's the degree to which I didn't want to bother anyone else, even when it came to my own name. And so quite wild when
Tell me more about that. Was it from
Sure.
you know, your upbringing or culture? Because culturally Iranians so oppressed, and I wonder if it's either the culture, the family dynamics, or a mixture of both.
I think it might be unique to me, but it might be culture playing in as well. I remember when we moved here to Vancouver in 1998, I was 14 or 15 years old, and the way I remember that time of my life is that I was a chameleon, that I knew very well how to blend in and not create any kind of noise or disruption or you know, just kind of be hanging out in the backgrounds and just kind of witnessing, observing, noticing, and then mimicking what's happening. I didn't know who I was, what I wanted, and so all I did was really almost put on a persona or a mask as a way to blend in. I didn't know about prom or you know, bonfires and parties and alcohol and, you know, oh, someone is drinking their beer this way, so let me drink this way. You know, it's like mimicking others around me. And so based on, you know, reflecting back on that time and like comparing it to how I am today, I'm just really reclaiming my name, you know, and who I am and trying to live in truth, in authenticity. And it's into like how that happened, where
Yeah.
at some point I probably disconnected from who I was. I had no idea who I was.
Well, even you mentioned it as you're sharing that bit of, I'm a chameleon because I wanted to fit in and not disturb. The first thing that comes to mind for me as you were sharing that, and I recognize that mask that you talked about, for me it was safety. And I wonder if that resonates with you. Is it you're a chameleon so that you can camouflage, so you can be safe, so you won't be disturbed.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
And where did that come about? Like, where did that need?
I need to check in.
Yeah.
Where did that come about?
Because even from so young, you already started doing that.
Yeah, I guess the answer that comes up is, not being accepted for who I am, and that I need to become someone else in order to be accepted or feel a sense of belonging or ultimately to be loved. That's what comes up to me, that I have to change myself in order to be loved. I think that's what it kind of boils down to.
Tell me more about that. Where is it from your upbringing, from when you were living back in Iran, or?
So just to set up a little bit of context, I was born in Iran during the Iran-Iraq War, so a time of a lot of collective tension and stress and chaos. And after my mom had me, when I was only 8 or 9 months old, my father decided to move us to the US, where he was going to do his PhD at the University of Oregon. And so here I am as a baby, and my mom with 2 kids. She's only 19.
Oh, sweet.
And a new culture, a new language, a new environment, and I can only imagine how hard it must have been for her. So, and how safe did I feel, both from as far back when I was in the womb till I was born in this environment, and then moving to a country with a mom who might have suffered from some postpartum depression or sadness of just being away from home and having this culture shock, I guess. We were there till I was 7, and then we moved back to Iran. So again, another quite rapid transition where, from mixed boys and girls school and color, like I entered this very gray kind of, all boys school where kids were like fighting and bullying each other and madness. It was like, oh my God, like what's going on? Why is everyone so mean with each other? Or it's really true that in Iran, you do hear that chant of death to America, like at school.
Wow.
They do encourage you to like, say that. Not all the time, but sometimes. And I was like, wait a minute, why are they saying death to this country I just like came from, So it was very confusing for a kid growing up in Iran. And so ultimately I kind of learned how to cope, adapt, find friends and belong until I was about 14 or 15, where we moved here to Canada. So quite a few moves in my life which never truly allowed me to solidify like a sense of identity or self. There's a saying that around psychedelics or, the kind of spiritual work is that you first need to have an identity or an ego before you dissolve an ego. And like for me, it was like, who the fuck am I, even before going into these journeys? So that can be incredibly destabilizing for someone who doesn't know who they are. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a long answer to your question. And now I forgot what your original question was.
You answered it so beautifully. I was like, oh, where do you think that need for masking things, safety came from? And you answered it. There's so many things. It's not just one thing.
Yeah.
Your mom's lack of safety, even, right? Even when you're in her womb. And the thought that came to mind as you're sharing as well, that displacement, being away from home, being away from family, and not given the choice. It's not like they wanted to leave. It's just safety. They're seeking safety. So then, again, and then when they're in somewhere new, it takes a while to settle and, again, find safety, right?
Yeah.
And if you're in a place where not a lot of other Iranians are, there's a lack of that community, then again you feel othered, right? And then lack of safety, right? And or lack of familiarity. So oftentimes comfort comes from familiarity, right? And when there's not that, mixing from all the trauma that's happened before, and you said war too, that's a lot. So it explains a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a very both incredible but also very layered and nuanced life so far. Yeah.
And it's so beautiful how you shared it that way, because oftentimes people don't understand. They're like, oh, is it just me? And it's like, no, it's not just you. It's like a multitude of things, like your relationship with your family and your relationship with where your home was, and there's all these little nuance or systems that really shapes and your experience, right? Tell us more. Like, let's dive into the thing that really shifted you to really say, hey, and look at yourself and say, who the fuck am I? Like, why? Like, really.
Well, I still don't know fully, but I'll try. It's been a journey, you know, to come to this place of what are my needs? What do I want? To ask for help, to ask for support for so long. You know, I always thought that, you know, I need to figure this shit out on my own. You know, I would climb mountains. I would travel to these exotic places. I would seek always on the outside, trying to find the answer, you know, and through different systems and maps and journeys and philosophies, you know, everything from Vipassana meditation to yoga to now more recently psychedelics, and not recently actually, my first experience with psychedelics was about 20 years ago, but more recently in a more intentional way, I guess. Coming to this realization that, first of all, it's not out there. You know, you've been looking your whole life, you know, seeking something that's already here, and just finding that at homeness. I remember one particular ayahuasca experience in 2017 in Peru, where I was truly able to experience this feeling of homeness within, like how it feels to feel at home, you know, on the inside, not just the sense of like, where do I go, or where do I need to be, or what environment do I need to surround myself by. And that was just such a peaceful, beautiful, calming, it's okay kind of moment. But little did I know that a few months later, something very heavy, chaotic, traumatic was about to happen, which was, and you probably read about my story a little bit, but essentially what happened is that in early 2018, they arbitrarily, unjustly, undeservedly, unnecessarily arrested my father for no reason. Like, sometimes people ask, well, why would they arrest someone for no reason? I can get into the details, but that's kind of irrelevant right now. But they arrested him, and he died within 2 weeks of being in jail. And they said that he committed suicide. So imagine that amount of information within one phone call, you know, and your whole body has no idea what to do. So what does it naturally do? It just shuts down. So it goes into a freeze state, as we know now. And I'm just catching my breath just to make sure I'm present with this. And I still remember before the person was about to call, they said, Mehran, are you ready to speak? I'm about to deliver some very heavy news, something like that. So in that, he said, I'll call in a minute or two. In that minute or two, I envisioned every single possible scenario that could go wrong, and ultimately the news that I got was like the worst one. And so that loop, that feedback loop, that cycle has repeated itself over the past 5 years, where I am just waiting for something bad to happen, and where that sense of safety just got sucked out of me, you know, feeling safe in my body, feeling safe in the universe, and or even being betrayed by the universe, as if someone out there is out to get me, or is trying to hurt me, or just in all the worst imaginable ways. And so I guess just to provide a little bit of context, so what he was doing, they had an NGO, a non-profit in Iran, and one of their goals was to help save the Asiatic cheetah, an animal of which there's less than 20 left in Iran. So incredibly rare, incredibly elusive, hard to find, and they were trying to track this animal using cameras that they were setting up in different parts in Iran. And the government, or the regime, or the IRGC in this case, the Revolutionary Guards, which is kind of a shadow government in Iran, accused them of setting up these cameras to monitor missile activities. So they accused them of espionage and of being spies, and my dad all of a sudden was a MI6 or CIA, you know, operative. And while he was in jail, we knew that this was going on, but whoever we talked to said, don't worry, of course your dad hasn't done anything, he's innocent, it'll be okay, like the few people we spoke to. But it was a lot more serious than we thought, like the way they had planned this and targeted them and ultimately accused them of all of these things. And it was in another ayahuasca experience in 2020 in Brazil that I got to realize that my dad didn't die of suicide, but he died under duress, under torture, under, probably had a heart attack. In our country, what they do is that they try to force a confession out of you. So they, even this scenario can be a bit scary because they are essentially putting a camera on you and asking you to admit something you haven't done against yourself or others. So I was 99.9% sure that my dad would never commit suicide, because in that version of the story where he had committed suicide, it meant that he didn't love me, or that he didn't care for us, or that he took the easy way out, or that, he was like, fuck this, I'm out. But in the ayahuasca journey, I got to see that, they weren't able to get a single word or confession out of him. And he was willing to die for that, essentially to live in truth and integrity and in what he believed in, and he wasn't willing to speak against himself or others, and that's how he died. And so the ayahuasca just flipped that narrative, that story where he died a hero instead of a coward. The part of me that really wanted to almost vilify him, because that was easier to grieve if he was like this person who was weak or gave up, rather than this incredibly, this incredible soul.
It's harder to let go, right?
It's very hard to let go when you love someone so much, And so he was everything for me. He was my mentor, my, our rock, our foundation. It was kind of like a four-legged table, losing a leg, and then you're hoping that somehow, this will balance itself out. But it's been a very, very hard journey since then.
You mentioned, please correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned that you had your first ayahuasca journey feeling at home before this big news.
Yeah.
So that's such a big juxtapose, like, okay, you're home, you're safe, right? Home safety. And then suddenly this, like, that must have such a big wide range of feeling, right? How are you processing that now? Because as you're sharing this, I'm just hearing that, I'm like, wow, that's something to even put your body through, right?
Yeah. That you kind of land in your body, but then the universe sends you a signal or something happens where it just like takes you right out again. And so for me, it's been a process of coming back to my breath, coming back to my body, coming back to safety. You know, consciously, I'm probably not aware of it, but unconsciously, it's been very hard for me to trust or to feel safe, or, you know, to do psychedelic journeys in groups because I may just switch off based on what other people are experiencing and not feel safe enough to completely open or surrender. It was a recent 5-MeO experience a couple of weeks ago where honestly for the first time in 5 years I think I fully surrendered. I fully surrendered, like where I was able to just breathe, you know, and just allow this white light wash over me and not have to do anything, think anything or show up in any way or like have anything be any different than what it is. And just so it was full acceptance and surrender, and it was just profound, you know. That was probably the first time in my life probably, for that matter, where I was able to just fully you know, let go.
In that experience, what did you felt in that full surrender?
Just my breath. Yeah, just a very open, you know, just being deeply connected to my breath and just feeling here, feeling, wow, like I haven't been here in a long time, you know. I've either been ruminating on the past and things that have happened, or, you know, now what the fuck am I going to do if I've lost my dad, who's going to take care of finances, or who's going to, like, you know, take care of my mom and the dogs, and my brother who's suffering from addiction, you know, his own struggles, you know. So there's so much going on that you just can't be with you and or in the moment. Like you always have to be worrying about something, and it's exhausting to always be in the head or be in that past or future. So it was like, here you go, you can be in a place which is totally possible and accessible anytime, just dropping in where everything's okay. And so one of the lines I think I wrote following this experience was, find peace in this moment and the next moment will be okay. Find peace in this moment and the next moment will be okay. So it's just like one moment to moment to moment to moment, rather than, you know, projecting 1 month, 1 year, 10 years ahead.
I'm curious because you mentioned with the headspace, like you're so in your head, and I get it, because sometimes life shows you certain things and then creates this environment where it's almost like the universe is like, now you found home.
Yeah.
I find that when we seek certain things, the universe will seek us back or answer, not in the way we want it to, from my own personal experiences. And what I found very interesting, what you shared, is the piece of you were trying to drop more into Mehran's, right? And through that process, it was initially a lot of external.
Yeah.
And then you realize, it's from within.
Yeah.
And my curiosity is like, what really allowed you to start turning that from within? Like, because our external gets so busy, like we seek this thing, and then the universe is like, okay, we're to provide you all these opportunities to do that, but it might not look like the way we anticipate it to be. It might not look like a bed of roses. It'd be like what you experienced, that hard news after your first ayahuasca trip.
Yes.
About your dad's death, right?
Yeah.
Or like even the opportunity to be away from home and start a new life in the States, right?
Yeah.
Those are, I see them as opportunities, like, how are you going to really create the sense of home for yourself? That's not external.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you,
Yes.
how are you making meaning or processing all this?
Well, you know, when my dad died, I obviously left my body and entered my head. And when we enter the head, we go into thoughts. And when we go into thoughts, it usually leads to negative thoughts, because the more we think, ultimately, it almost seems like a default pattern of the brain. I don't know if this is universal, but it is for me, that it goes towards negative thoughts or bad scenarios or worst case scenarios. and or asking why, like, why did this happen? Why me? Why him? Why such a good man, you know, had to die so young? Or all of this, why? Which is the rational, analytical, you know, linear mind trying to answer something that it can't. And so good luck if you want to stay there, you know. And for me, like, I did go down a deep rabbit hole of the mind, but ultimately learning that that runs into a wall. So I had no choice. I was kind of forced, with the help of the medicines, of course, to step out of the rational mind and enter the transpersonal, the spiritual. I know that's a big word, but these other realms of consciousness that are beyond the mind. It's kind of like, how can you, through a subset of a system, understand the system itself? Like, imagine this kind of circle within a larger circle, trying to understand this larger circle. You know, it's just impossible. So I hit a wall and realized that, you know, I had to step into these other knowings, perhaps, you know, let's call it intuition, higher self, soul, our body, our innate wisdom. It has many names. And so this is what psychedelics in the past 5 years have helped me do, to quiet the mind, as Ramdas says, listen to the heart, you know, quiet the mind, open the heart. And the heart is just like opening up a little bit to peek through, like, is it okay, am I safe? And then it closes back again. And then next time it opens up just a little bit more. And so it's just been this process of kind of just checking to see if it's safe or not. And as I'm saying that, immediately what comes up is like that little kid in me that's like very afraid. It's like, dude, like, this is just fucked up. Like, I'm going to check out and I'm going to hide and I'm going to just, you know, hide in the closet while all of this, you know, shitty, scary stuff is happening. And so I cringe at the idea of like inner child work, and I never liked it, but I'm starting now just recently to open up to it because I realize it's true. Usually what we resist or are afraid of is like exactly what we need to look at or where to go, which is like, it's not the best realization, but realizing that how can I help hold that kid's hand to help him feel safe in the world again. You know, that's really what happened. This little kid who loved his father and lost him, you know, all too sudden, and who, and so I need to remind him that it's okay to come out and play, to play, you know, to have, you know, my dad, I'm sure the only thing that he wanted for us to fucking live a good life, to be happy, not to be miserable. You know, I notice times, you know, where I can, you know, fall into victim mentality or martyrdom or, oh, woe is me, and then others come and, oh my God, poor you, and, you know, you reinforce that, because if you're identifying as a victim, you're attracting someone who keeps you in your victimness, you know. It's kind of just repeating that cycle, reinforcing that cycle. And so I choose, like, very deliberately, with all my agency, that I want to be a creator, not a victim, that I want to create, that I want to be in my creative, flowy, feminine, you know, energy, and not be in this, like, very, you know, rigid, controlling, not trusting, linear, you know, I guess slightly more in the masculine, you know. So I'm really digging this new balance of, you know, feminine and masculine that I'm finding in myself, and just choosing one day at a time to shed, to let go, to trust, to open up, to create.
Oh, that sounds like play for a little child. Like, it is play, to trust, to feel safe, to explore, to feel joy, right? And as you're sharing that, I can relate, because growing up I had my own traumas, and the thing I remember in one of my own medicine journey, and then I even says, like, and it was after, it was like through integration and processing, I was like, I know why I have this maladaptive behavior, and I couldn't make sense of it because it was so compulsive. I just do it automatically without me realizing it, and I have people pointing it out to me, and now I'm just like, I would brush it off, and then something dawned upon me, it's like, I do it to feel safe. She's trying to hide. That little girl in me, she's trying to hide, and that's how she keeps herself safe. because she doesn't want to be seen.
Yes.
Right? And I'm like, oh. And when I was able to actually recognize that and hold her, because I could feel her crying and then getting emotional just talking about it, the need to engage in that coping mechanism faded. I could feel it shift. And I stopped doing it after. And just to give more context, the need is like, the compulsive need is to lie. And it's not that I'm lying to be a bad person or to hurt you on purpose. It's to lie. So it was actually for myself. It's to, when I hide information or lie to others, it's not to hurt them or to keep them from the truth. It's actually, it was for me to lie to myself so that I didn't have to see the pain. I didn't have to see the rejection. I didn't have to see not being loved. And so that I could hide. Right? And I was like, oh. So that was a piece that I came to, and I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I was just trying to hide you so that you could be safe, but this is not helping.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Exactly. That all of these parts, or all of these protectors that have been trying to protect these younger parts, as IFS, internal family systems teaches us, shows us, they all had a purpose. They all had a reason. Nothing is an error. Like Ram Dass, who I consider one of my teachers, it's wild when we hear this, but he said, can't you see, his teacher would tell him, Neem Karoli Baba would tell Ram Dass, can't you see it's all perfect? Can't you see it's all perfect? And he was like, perfect? Like, how can it be perfect? Wars, famine, you know. How can it be perfect? And so, but ultimately in these experiences, that's what you arrive at. You arrive at every single step along the way, and every part that had to show up, or every little event that happened in your life was just bringing you closer to who you are, and just bringing you closer to your true, most authentic self, and not the self from the egoic personality identity self, but that deeper self. And so that's what the universe has been doing, for me. And am I grateful every day? No. Like, there are days where I struggle and it's very hard, and I'm still in the victim mindset, but other days I'm like, oh, I get it. Like, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
May I add to that? I had a beautiful opportunity to work with a medicine man, and he shared this quote that really remained with me. And because I love working with parts, and part of my work through hypnosis, working through altered conscious states, the parts itself, and they actually give it voice. Like, I literally, when I work with people, and I've gone through it myself, it's a different voice. It's almost like you speak as a different person. And the character changes too, like their nuance, the way you move. It's really fascinating to see and witness and to experience, because I've gone through it. Because parts of me were like, this is me? I sound really different. Right? And anyways, I sidetracked there. Back to the quote. The quote is like, healing, or really coming home, is, or being whole, is integrating and loving all the parts. There's no unwanted parts. It's just bringing all the parts home together. And that is home.
That is home. That is home. Where they can all merge and interact and play, rather than be in conflict, or in exile, or in separation, or split off,
shunned,
or or judged.
And even in that judgment, that's okay. It's like learning to accept that part that needed to protect you in a way that it did. And when you understand it, it also has, it's like looking at a coin, both sides exist. It's like two truths can exist at the same time. So just because, yes, this part is wounded and it likes to act in a certain way, it can, like, say, perfectionism, because I know I have that. But it also has that other side where if you honor it and see it and not shun it and see its wounded parts, it also served in a way where it allowed me to be more motivated to do things and get where I am, because I won't be here without it. I won't be here doing the work that I'm feeling that really resonates with my soul
Yeah.
without it.
Yes.
So in its woundedness has provided me an energetic strength. It's just how you tune into it. It's like your
Yeah.
ayahuasca trip where it's like it helped you reframe it.
Yeah.
It doesn't change it.
No.
It is, but it's just like this is how I can use it energetically instead.
Yes. Yeah, totally. To take on a slightly different role. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that really fascinates me because of your upbringing, culture, and you said you were seeking different ways externally to come home within or find home within. And you said breath work and all these other things. How did psychedelics came about? Because like for me, culturally, psychedelics is like, no. And I'm ashamed and a little guilty to say, like my parents still don't know. Like I said it, I was like, oh, I'm training in this, and they're like, oh, okay. But I don't think it
they
really registered to them. I think
Right.
if they fully understood what I did, they'll be like, oh.
Yeah. No, you're still like the doctor or the engineer or like this good girl. They'll just live in their fantasy.
Well, because I know there's certain things that are like, they're really against, they're very structured, and I see their traumas and wounds.
Yeah.
And I've, a few times I was like, I'm taking this training that is working through psychedelic assisted psychotherapy work, doing therapy with psychedelics.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay. And then I was like, why didn't they make more of a bigger think about it?
Yeah, and that little girl in you too perhaps might be looking for a little bit of validation also, right? Like, oh, can you see like what amazing work I'm doing? Like, can you see me? But that's also, so it's both ways, that not only do they not hear it, but you are also not seen or heard in that exchange. So,
it's really interesting, yeah.
But where did psychedelics come in? So I was kind of thinking of when my first psychedelic experience was this morning, and it was actually in 2001 at the Capilano Suspension Bridge, of all places.
But a beautiful place to do
it. A beautiful place, but a very
beautiful
scary place to do it, obviously, where it felt like, terrifying. I think it took us half an hour to cross the bridge, to desperately hold on. But it was still a beautiful experience. I remember, just feeling in tune with nature, with the leaves, with the trees, with the grass, sensing an ant walking on the grass, like being very attuned. But it was more not necessarily recreational, but I didn't know what to do with this. I had no idea what it meant or what it was or what this means. And so it just kind of faded, and I went back to being a shy, introverted kid in university. Was I like probably first year of university at UBC. And I think I've always felt like a bit of black sheepedness. Like I've always been an outlier. I've always been outside the box. I've always been like, why are people enjoying this? Like that doesn't seem fun, that kind of thing, And so I think through that foundation of just being an outlier, I always sought like different novel experiences or things. And actually my first interaction with psychedelics was not quite positive, because before I'd ever taken mushrooms, my brother had a bad mushroom trip, and I had to go pick them up, him and his friends, and take them to the hospital, like older brother, he's 2 years older. And so, they had a bad trip or, freaked out or whatever it was. And so I'm glad that I trusted enough to be able to do it a few years later on my own, with a few friends. And that began really a journey of, I think, questioning or just being like the skeptic. And I love that about myself, that I always I just don't take something as it's given or told, or because it's like widely accepted, you need to accept it too. I'm like, fuck that. Like there's a rebel inside of me for sure. And so I think it was about 2000, maybe 6 or 7, that I came about Ram Dass, who was, a big proponent of psychedelics, a big part of the movement, along with Timothy Leary, and, consuming vast amount of LSD, and then realizing the way he described it was that it's kind of like being in the room with God, but getting kicked out, where he kept wanting to have that high, but not come down. My family brings me down. Society brings me down. Others, but he was like, well, you can't just stay high all the time, and that's impossible. So that then took him to India to find his own teacher and, you know, find what the meaning of LSD was, find his truth, and then ultimately coming and spreading it with the rest of the world, or the US in particular. And I'm also skeptical of any teacher, by the way. It's very hard for me to trust any one system or teacher. I think they're all bullshit.
I agree with you. And, you know, even in our education system, I was just like, when you're a counselor, and I wanted to dive a little into that after, we can sidetrack later. It's like, how did you go from like corporate world into being a counselor?
Right.
And I find that true, like even as a counselor doing therapy work during school, they teach you all these modalities, approaches, and it's like, pick one, or you need to really know what you want to be in. That's how you identify yourself into the world. I'm like, you know, I'm like, is this the system again working out of fear and marketing? It's like marketing money and like,
For sure.
And the other thing is like very pigeonholed. That like confines you, because like I believe through my own experiences is that there's no one thing that fits all.
No.
There's no such thing, and in reality, it's a way of control, like those systems, right? It's a way of like trying to place you in a certain way so that we can work you back into the system, right?
Yeah.
And it's all like, it's, if anything, it's like, how can I best put it? These systems here are not to serve, really, that to encourage you to look within, right? It's to like more external factors again.
Yes.
Like how do you feed it back into the system? So it can be kind of almost like fear-based, right? Or control-based.
For sure. I was there too, you know, as a kid, only 18 or 19, not having any clue what I wanted. Like I just chose economics because I thought that, I chose BCom commerce. I didn't get accepted, so I ended up in economics, but wanting to choose like money, because like my parents would sometimes fight over money, and like I guess the unconscious thought or conscious was that like I don't want to be poor, like I don't want to grow up in a way that I'd have to like fight or argue over money, and so let me become rich, that kind of idea.
So you think you would be safe again? It's this external thing, right?
Probably, exactly. I was tying money to safety and security and stability, and then after that getting an MBA, and then working in China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, Japan for 8-9 years. You know, it seems wild. It's such a different avatar. Like I can't imagine like I was doing that, but you know, it was a good life. I was flying business class. You know, drivers were picking you up at the airport, and you stay at all these nice hotels, and you know, status. You kind of get used to it. You know, it does feel very comfortable, and yet there was a deeper part of me that was like, nope, like this is not you. This is not true. This is all a show. And it was till 2018 that when my dad died, that it kind of woke me up from that dream and started to show me who I was, and kind of transition into this new life now, where after my dad died, so it was in October of 2017 that I did ayahuasca, and then I booked a retreat for my brother at Rhythmia, the center in Costa Rica, to do his ayahuasca journey, because he was struggling with addiction. And this is still the fixer, helper, rescuer part in me that wanted to like help my brother who's suffering from addiction. You know, you need to do this, right? Like that part of me that was imposing. And I just booked this retreat for him and said, you know, you're going in January, in a few months. He met Gabor Maté when he was there at the center, who was a visiting guest speaker, and they became really close. Like my brother is this very charismatic, like, you know, gentle soul that people connect with, and he's awesome despite like his chaos and rebellion and addictions and like just all over the place. He's an incredibly kind person, and so they connected. My brother had this amazing experience, and then it was 3 weeks after his experience that my dad was arrested and subsequently killed. So both of us had these ayahuasca journeys, which gave us just enough kind of leeway or capacity capacity to be able to kind of go through this very chaotic event. And Gabor heard about our story. He invited us into his home when we landed in Vancouver in March of 2018. By the way, there's a whole other layer that I'm not even including here. When we went to the airport in Iran, they blocked my mom from traveling. So me and my brother, our 3 dogs, and 9 suitcases, my mom said, you guys go, like, I'll come. You guys go. And it was a very incredibly hard decision to make in the moment. Like, literally the plane is about to fly and we have to decide whether to stay or go. And this is what countries like ours, or regimes or authoritarian, systems do. They wanted to keep her in the country as a way to keep us silent, to keep us quiet and, don't say anything about what happened, because they don't want exposure, bad exposure, which they already have, but even more. And so Gabor, going back to Gabor, he heard about our story, invited us into his home. He introduced me to CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies, where the person leading their psychedelic therapy program, Janice Phelps, she invited me to join a weekend of classes there. And at a time of utmost chaos, like, that was the only thing that made a little bit of sense in my life, where I knew deep in my soul that I didn't want to go back to business. I didn't want to go back to, an office job or what I was doing before. So I couldn't apply for the psychedelic therapy program yet because I didn't qualify. I wasn't a, social worker or therapist or, so essentially the next 4 years, I just decided to go back to school to get a master's in counseling psychology at the same school at CIIS, and then have 1,000 hours of, direct client hours, and then ultimately applying for that program and getting in. And it helps when, I shouldn't admit this, but Gabor Maté was recommending me. So with that, you're almost guaranteed. And so I finished that in 2021. And ever since, I've started working with people. And, through my own lived experience in combination with, the theoretical, conceptual, didactic, but also experiential components of the training that I've done, really translating all this suffering into something my dad would be proud of, and to really make him happy, and in the process, find meaning. We hear this, like, what's your meaning, purpose, in life, but it really is, I'm not fully there yet, but it's starting to make sense that when you're with someone and when you see healing happen and when you see things shift and people open up and breathe and smile and love and feel love for themselves and heal, like, it's just the most beautiful, incredibly rewarding feeling.
It is. I don't know how else to describe it. It's like, for me, when I found my purpose, like, medicine really did help me do that. And medicine can do that. That's where it led us to what we do in healing ourselves. And by healing ourselves and really learning to be with our wounded inner child, I can see that in others. And it's not about fixing them. Because I get it. When I first started as a therapist, I was like, okay, what can I do to help you fix you? That's not how it works. And now it's just more like inviting them. And holding their hand so they don't have to do it alone, and for them to invite their adult self to actually hold and embrace their inner child. What a beautiful gift to witness. And sometimes, because I am quite intuitive, I can literally feel the energy shift when they do that, when they actually really drop into it. Because I know, our psyche is so tricky. And
it is.
To answer that question is like, why does our mind tend to go to the negative? It's a defense mechanism. It's a very primal, natural instinct state. That's why it hangs on to the negativity, because we want to keep you safe.
We need to survive. Like, this is fucking dangerous.
Exactly, right? And so I can see clients sometimes, like, skirt around it without even realizing. They'll be like, deflect or dissociate or... And it can be very subtle too. It'll be like something as like, oh, like, let me ask you, it's like, what are you really feeling? And then if it's like couples counseling, they'll look at their partner and it's like, what do you think? Do you think I'm a bad person? And they're like, wait, what's happening here? Right?
Or exactly, like, where I think for very long, like, I had to ask you, like, how am I doing? You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't able to discern what was me or like who I am or what I needed, and I sometimes needed to like get a kind of affirmation, confirmation, reflection from someone outside of me, you know, almost as if I'm just like floating in space and I need someone to like bring me back to like mold me into a shape or you know, it's so crazy.
It is great. And then the other thing is also, another thing is like I also witnessed where people would like, but it wasn't all that bad, and they start, because they would share all these things and I'm like, oh, I can see the pain, the wound, and then suddenly 2 seconds later they'll be like, and it was all really great too, it was feel I was like, wait, why are you hurrying off to this next thing?
Well, even today, like I must admit, Joni, you know, I've told my story, I've shared my story quite a few times, and I really want to honor it and the emotion that it holds and still holds. And yet I remember watching interviews of myself in 2018 after all of this happened. We went to every big, you know, media outlet, you know, from CNN to CBC, etc. And I'm telling this story, but I'm kind of smiling, you know, while I'm telling the story. The smile too is a defense, you know. I'm sharing something incredibly painful, yet trying to like show up, like, I don't know, like in a certain way or almost in real time. I don't want someone to feel bad. So I'm like, the part of me, like the caretaker in me, and simultaneously is there while I'm sharing something deeply intense. Or as you mentioned, I might just like brush it off slightly or just move on to the next subject without fully honoring it. That
mask that you talked about, right? Yeah, so it's really interesting. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to quickly ask you 3 questions because I know you didn't prepare for this.
Sure.
However, before we do that, because I know the camera kind of switched on and off, well, I'll have to figure around that.
Sure.
You got into the juicy part about your mom, and I don't want to leave our listeners hanging, so if you can bring that to a close.
I can come back.
Yeah. Or you can come back? Okay, well, then stay tuned for another episode where Mehran comes back and tells more about that then. Okay?
Yes.
So 3 questions. First question is, I know this journey hasn't ended for you, and I believe for myself it's a continuous journey until the last breath we take. And who do you see yourself as? Who is Mehran? Like, how would you describe him in this moment now? And I know that can change.
I'm a spark of creativity.
No, I love it. I love it. And then if you could travel back in time, what's one word of advice you would give to your inner child?
To not be afraid that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's painful, it's hard, but it's going to be okay.
Oh, love it. And the last question is, what is something that you're still unfolding or wanting to try or curious about?
Eros, like intimacy and eroticism, and I'm calling in a partner. You know, I am just very fascinated by sensual energy. And so that's something I hope to lean into, even though it's slightly outside of my comfort zone, but opening up to a lot more. I feel there's a lot there for me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on to this podcast.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was fun.
Yes. Oh, I'm glad.
Give you a hug.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. Oh, I'm so lucky to have met you.
Yeah, thank you. I was a little bit nervous in the beginning, but I think I was able to, with your help, to kind of...
This has been a HOTPOT Pod production, brought to you by Lucinor, a premier online psychedelic dispensary. Wander your mind at lucinor.net.